In episode 7, Perry, Milligan, and the DA meet with the judge, and the judge doesn't quite know what to do because this situation is sort of unprecedented. He's leaning towards declaring a mistrial, which nobody in the room wants, including Perry. Ultimately, what he ends up doing is giving Berger and Milligan 2 days to write up a plan on why the gun should be admissible in court, and also what they plan to do about Perry, bringing charges against him for hiding evidence. Perry has to head back to the office pretty disappointed. He thinks he's going to be disbarred, and he gets a phone call from Pete. He agrees to meet Pete because, after all, they're friends, and they meet on a bridge, and Pete's just been feeling really, really guilty about what he did to Perry. Even though Milligan was paying him, he feels scuzzy about screwing over a friend like this. To make it worse, he doesn't like Milligan, and Milligan is reveling in the fact that he got one over on Perry. So he feels like he owes it to Perry to apologize. And when Perry realizes that it was Pete who was the one that broke into his office and broke into the safe, he immediately starts swinging haymakers at him. The two start getting into a fight right there on the bridge. Although it doesn't take long for cool heads to prevail because they both kind of gas out. Pete then asks Perry, all right, what are we going to do about this case? Because he's already been paid by Milligan. So now he's ready to help out his friend. But Perry looks at him and says, what do you mean, what are we going to do? The kids are going to be found guilty and I'm going to be disbarred and thrown in jail. I mean, I do have one Hail Mary, but it requires putting all these pieces together. But if I do that, then I'm going to take down some of the biggest names in the city. And Pete really likes the sound of that and turns to Perry and says, all right, well, then let's do it. Pete and Perry head back to the office where Della and Paul are waiting for them. But when Pete walks in the door, neither Della or Paul are happy to see him, especially Paul. He can't stand Strickland after what he did to him. And he doesn't want to work with this guy at all. He thinks he's a scumbag. And Della certainly doesn't want to work with Pete, especially after Perry reveals that it was Pete who was the one that gave the DA the gun. Doesn't matter, though. Perry's name is on the door, and he calls the shots. And he says, I don't care what you guys do with him after the case, but right now, we need Pete. So let's think about what we're going to do to keep these boys off of death row. They write down everything that they know and everything they need to look into. But one of the things that Della needs to look into is the state of her friend. She heads to Berger's office, who is ironically drafting up the report for the judge, and she just goes to check on him. Lately, Berger's been really distant, short, irritable, and he's been chalking it up to the fact that they're going against each other in court, but Della knows that it's a lot more than that. So she presses him to tell her what's going on, and he reveals to her that he's being blackmailed. Somebody sent him photos of him hooking up with another guy, and he doesn't know who this person is, but he knows it has to do with a Gallardo case, and that's why he gave Della the deal that he did, even though he felt like the case was pretty ironclad. Della wants to dive into it more, find out who this person is who's blackmailing him, and go after him. But the DA says, Della, don't do that. Don't get involved. Just accept defeat and fall back gracefully. Della, though, isn't about to let her friend get blackmailed. She just has to figure out a way to find out how to save him. Later that night, Pete and Perry head to the docks to check out one of the McCutcheon's ships, and it's being loaded up with a bunch of produce. But they're not the only ones who are checking out the ship. So is Holcomb from a distance. Holcomb tells them that the ship is targeted to go to some port in Japan. He doesn't know where, and he can't figure out what exactly is going on, but with Pete and Perry there, he's just going to pack it in for the night. Pete and Perry decide, you know what, we're going to find out what's going on with this ship. We're going to sneak onto the ship. We'll pretend to be deckhands, and no one will know any of the wiser. And if the ship leaves, then we'll just steal a lifeboat and paddle back to shore. So the two blend in pretty seamlessly, and the ship does in fact leave a little while later, but Pete and Perry still don't have any answers, so they have to stay on it. But about an hour after the ship does leave, it comes to a stop, and that's when Pete and Perry get some answers, because some of the deckhands start throwing that produce that they loaded up into the ocean, while the other deckhands unload a lot of the oil into another ship that is right next to the McCutcheon one. Pete and Perry have no idea how this is connected, what exactly is going on, but at least they have something to go off of. They also, though, realize that the lifeboats are way too big to steal, so They have to kind of jump into the ocean with a life preserver and paddle back the tough way. Now, what Perry and Pete don't know is that earlier in the day, Camilla Nygaard and Lydell McCutcheon had a meeting with some representatives from Japan. The United States had just put some restrictions on selling to the Japanese. The Japanese have invaded a couple of allies of the U.S., and they're about to kick off World War II. These restrictions are only going to get worse and worse, and this is going to affect Lydell and Camilla's business, because the two are partners, even though they can't stand each other. Camilla kind of sabotaged the meeting, getting up and speaking to the two representatives in Japanese, telling them that they really should set up their own shop in Japan so they don't have to worry about these under-the-table deals. And they agree to meet with Camilla later on. And Lydell hates the fact that he was just undercut. He kind of reprimands Camilla, but Camilla doesn't care. She actually crosses the line a little bit by bringing up the recent reports from court regarding Brooks and his sexual escapades. That's something that the press has latched onto quite a bit, and many papers have posed the question if Lydell knew about his son's weird ways. And it's unclear if he did, but what Lydell did know is that Brooks was kind of a screw-up. After Brooks announced that the baseball team was coming to LA at the Soup Kitchen, that was the final straw for Lydell. He booked Brooks a one-way ticket to Cuba and demanded that he get on the ship and leave town before he screwed up anything else. Lydell was aware that Brooks had recently gotten subpoenaed, and he was worried about what Brooks would say on the stand, and he doesn't want to take any chances. But Brooks got really, really tired of being labeled a screw-up. So he yells at his dad, "I did exactly what you told me to do. You told me to work on charitable efforts, and that's what I did. I took all that food that you were wasting, and I fed a city of hungry people with it. I mean, what's the government going to give me? A fine? But you have this illegal oil scheme going on. And I don't know any of that. I mean, my hands are clean of that. So I don't really think that I'm the screw-up in this situation." Later that night, Brooks was murdered. But Perry and Pete, they don't know any of this. They just head back to the office and start trying to put the pieces together. And it's actually Marion who helps them out by questioning if Lydell could be selling oil to the Japanese to fund the war. And that's when this whole case breaks open for Perry. It's like somebody turned the lights on. Lydell had this under-the-table business with the Japanese to sell them oil. He would fake it like his ships were going to Japan when in reality they weren't. But Brooks, taking that produce and feeding the homeless with it, was shining a light on Lydell's bigger scam. And he couldn't afford that. So if all this is true, it looks like Lydell McCutcheon had his son murdered. With this eureka moment, Perry decided to go visit Lydell at his house and reveal everything that he knows about the case. He figures that he can use this to leverage Lydell to get his clients a better deal. But when he brings up Lydell having his own son murdered, Lydell gets in Perry's face saying, "I did nothing of the sort. I tried to save him." Every single allegation that Perry brought up to Lydell, he accepted. He didn't say a word. But the one allegation that he got upset about was this one. And it leaves Perry wondering if Lydell actually did have the trigger pulled. Now, the whole produce mess was something that Della dived into. She went to the USDA and she was trying to figure out what exactly they were investigating Brooks for. She knew that he was being investigated, and she knew that he was in business with Charlie Goldstein. She got a name for somebody at the USDA, and she went to go visit him, asking him questions. And that's where she learned that not only was Brooks being investigated, he, along with Charlie, were both subpoenaed. Although neither of them made the stand, they were both killed. Della asked the guy to see the file, and he went off to go see if he could show her, and he never came back. Some other guy entered the room, telling Della that the first guy wasn't coming back. And this second guy was really, really intimidating. But that man didn't work for the USDA. He worked for Camilla Nygaard. After he leaves the USDA office, he goes to visit Camilla, and he drops off some photos for her. Photos of Della, because that's the guy that's been following everybody around and keeping tabs on everybody. Of course, Perry has his own private investigator. It's Paul, and he's still trying to figure out who is in that blue car. He's doing one of his stakeouts, and Clara gets sick of it, so she decides to do it with him. And not too long after, the blue car shows up, and they follow it to a really nice, affluent neighborhood. They need to figure out a way, though, to find out who lives in that house. And Clara volunteers to go up, knock on the door, and pretend to be a Jehovah's Witness looking for donations. She does that, and the woman says for her to come in, but when Clara walks inside, the woman has a needle in her arm, and then she starts foaming at the mouth. Clara doesn't quite know what to do, and that's when the woman's husband comes home. This causes Clara to go hide in the closet so she's not found. But the woman's husband isn't just anybody. It's Phipps, Camilla Nygaard's attorney. As he is calling the police and the ambulance to come save his wife, Clara grabs a piece of mail so that Paul can get a name and sneaks out the back door. So the pieces are starting to come together. And then finally, a little bit of an update on the brothers. While Raphael is still in the hole, Matteo is visited by their mother, and she's got great news. Raphael has made art school. She leaves it up to Matteo whether or not to tell him once he gets out of solitary confinement. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.